Have you ever really thought about the difference between being married and just living with someone, at least in the eyes of the law? Well, you might be surprised to hear that the answer to that question could be worth six figures. In this explainer, we are breaking down the rules of splitting up in Canada so you can make some really smart decisions about your own future.
So, are you married or common law? It seems like a simple question, right? But believe me, it has huge financial implications. We're going to show you exactly why that one little piece of paper, or, the lack of it, can change literally everything when a relationship ends.
All right, so let's get right into it. What is the big deal about being married versus common law? Well, when we're talking about your money and your assets, it's like you're playing two completely different games with two totally different sets of rules. Let's break down what they are.
At first glance, if you look at a province like Ontario, it seems like married and common law couples have pretty similar rights, especially when it comes to spousal and child support. The courts look at things like need and who contributed what. But take a closer look at that third line, equalization of net family property. That is where everything changes. It is an absolute game changer.
Okay, so here's the bottom line. Marriage is legally treated as a full-on financial partnership. Any wealth you build together, you share it when you split. Simple. But common law? Well, in Ontario, the default setting is basically like being long-term roommates. You only have to split the stuff that's officially in both of your names. Everything else? It's generally off the table.
So what if you don't like the government's default rules? Are you just stuck with them? Well, the good news is, no, you don't have to play by them. Whether you're planning on getting married or just moving in together, you can write your own personal rule book. It's called a domestic contract. You probably know it as a prenup or a cohabitation agreement.
Think of a legal contract like baking a cake. For it to turn out right, you absolutely need all 5 of these key ingredients. You need a clear offer and acceptance. You need 2 people who are of sound mind, that's competent parties. You need an exchange of value, that's consideration. You both have to seriously intend for it to be legally binding, and of course, it has to be for a legal purpose. If you miss even one of these, your whole contract could be half-baked and fall apart in court.
Okay, but let's be real. What happens if you sign something that is just wildly unfair? I mean, we're talking completely, totally one-sided. Does the law just look the other way and say, tough luck, you signed it? Not exactly. There's actually a legal safety net for contracts that are so lopsided they're just plain wrong.
The legal world has a pretty intense phrase for this. It's called unconscionable. It's just a fancy word for a contract that is so fundamentally unfair, its terms would literally shock the conscience of the court. Now, this isn't for just a bad deal. This is for a deal that's so rotten it's actually offensive to the idea of justice itself.
Just imagine this for a second. A stay-at-home parent who gives up their entire career for years to raise the kids, which allows their partner to go out and build a huge fortune. Then they split, and a contract they sign says they get absolutely nothing. That is precisely the kind of shocking injustice that would make a judge's jaw hit the floor. All right, so moving on. Let's say a marriage is ending. What does it actually take to make it official in Canada? It's not as simple as just packing a bag and walking away. There's a formal legal process called a divorce, and to get one, you have to have a valid reason, or what the law calls grounds.
Basically, in Canada, you've got 2 main paths to get a divorce. The first is what's called a fault divorce, where you have to prove your spouse committed adultery or was cruel. The other option is the no-fault route, which simply requires you to live separate and apart for at least 1 full year.
Now, you might be thinking, oh, I'll prove fault, especially if you're feeling hurt. But here's the reality check. Trying to prove adultery or cruelty is incredibly expensive, it's very public, and it's emotionally draining. And, this is the crucial part, it gives you 0 financial advantage in the final settlement. That's why the vast majority of divorces in Canada are based on that simple 1-year separation rule.
Okay, when a relationship ends, money's almost always a huge part of the conversation. But did you know that when we talk about financial support, the law actually sees 2 completely different types, and each one has its own very distinct set of rules? Let's dig in.
First up is child support. This is super important. It's the right of the child. It's for their benefit, and the person who receives it doesn't pay any tax on it. Then you have spousal support. That's for your ex-partner's needs. And that money is taxable for the person who gets it, and it's tax-deductible for the person who pays it. That is a huge distinction that can make a big difference to your bank account.
And now we get to the main event, especially for married couples, the equalization payment.
This is where that whole idea of marriage being a true financial partnership really gets put into action.
To really get a handle on equalization, you first have to understand this one key term, net family property, or NFP for short. It's basically a before and after snapshot of your finances. It measures the growth in your net worth all the way from your wedding day to the day you separated.
Okay, let's make this super simple with an example. Let's say during the marriage, spouse A's personal net worth grew by $200,000. During that same time, spouse B's net worth only grew by $100,000. Well, that's not exactly a 50-50 split of the wealth they built together, is it?
So the whole point of the law here is to level that playing field. The idea is that both partners should walk away with an equal share of the financial pie they baked together as a team. But how do you actually do that? Well, the math is surprisingly simple.
Step 1 is easy. You just find the difference between their two net family properties. So in this case, it's $200,000 minus $100,000, which gives you a difference of $100,000.
And here is the magic rule. It is so simple and so elegant. The spouse who has the higher NFP pays the other spouse exactly half of that difference. So in our example, spouse A writes a check to spouse B for $50,000. What happens then? Well, spouse A is left with $150,000, and spouse B now has $150,000. Boom! Just like that, it's perfectly balanced. It's a really fair way to split the wealth they created together.
So there you have it. That's a crash course in the financial side of splitting up in Canada. We've looked at how the law views marriage versus common law, how you can actually write your own rules, and how all that wealth gets divided in the end. So now the real question is for you. Does your current relationship status actually reflect the future that you and your partner are planning for? It's definitely a conversation worth having. Thanks so much for joining me.